to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. This is the place where you get both a coach's and sports dietitian perspective on topics important to endurance sports, including nutrition, training, and how these impact and fit into your daily life both on and off the race course. Your host, Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian with a specialty in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone. So this is podcast episode 5 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm Coach Justin, and I'm here with Coach Katie. Today, our topic is how your training fits into your lifestyle. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you consider when picking races, forming expectations, and how to form these that fits into your life and not have to try and fit your life around your training. These two should interlock together like a puzzle, like two puzzle pieces, and you're not trying to like jam these pieces together. So we want them to fit nicely. So we hope that you're going to get a lot out of this podcast episode. And following that, we're going to talk about some of the different scenarios that Katie and I came up with that we thought would shed some light on how to structure your training given these various lifestyles. So we're going to look at some of these nuances and maybe some tips and ideas on how to get your training in and not have to make too many sacrifices on both ends in terms of your lifestyle and family demands and your training. So welcome. This is, like I said, it was podcast episode 5. We are in, let's see, what is it? It is April 8th of 2025. How you doing, Katie?
I'm doing really good. I got off a tough week last week of training for my marathon, a big mileage week, kind of a big volume week. So with all things considered, I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Doing pretty well. I got my first race behind me. Well, it's the first triathlon. I've taken about a 4-year absence from the sport, recovering from various surgeries and issues. And so I dipped my toe back into the triathlon world, and it was a really big success. So I'm happy about that. And forming a new plan for the next race, which is going to be in May. So it's going to be another sprint. Working my way back up the ladder again. So
that's always good to get a race, like a race under your belt kind of thing, after such an absence. It's just nice. It's a good
it's a big confidence boost, if it goes well. And if it doesn't go well, then you're back to the drawing board trying to figure things out. But my race was a huge success. I do have some things that I'm walking away with in terms of, what to work on next. And how to fix some of these little holes that are in there for the next race. But other than that, I couldn't have asked for a better result. So
awesome. Yeah.
All right. So now that we've talked about, my race and then Katie's training volume, we can see on how training can either work with your life or fight against it. And so I think a good way to start this and trying to find a training plan that fits, it all starts from, picking races that fit into your lifestyle. I've been coaching one of my athletes since the very start of Tabula Rasa Race, and he's got, a couple, when we started working together, he had younger kids, a fairly demanding job, but it wasn't too demanding. And, he progressed nicely. He was focusing on Olympic distance triathlons. And I was talking to him and I was trying to encourage him. I was like, hey, maybe you might want to step up and consider going for the half iron. And he just flat out said, it's like, this fits into my life. And it couldn't have been a better answer to the question on, maybe why he hadn't stepped up. I've also got another athlete that I work with who may have just kind of like a normal kind of like 9 to 5 job, has, some leeway in terms of like working from home, but she has, 3 kids and a demanding schedule. Her husband is a police officer, so his schedule is kind of like all over the place. And so many times I think that she kind of takes on the role of kind of like a single mother that's not a single mother. It's, in terms of like getting kids to events, and her kids are really active. And, there was supposed to be a race that was in May that I was going to go to, and we just started working together. I haven't talked to any of these athletes and getting their permission, so I'm not going to say any names or anything like that. I'm just talking about their general story. So, um, her daughter was accepted to go into university, and she does not live in the U.S., so there's a different kind of like structure there. And she was training for half iron, and I kind of saw the wheels kind of falling off of the training train. And so I reached out to her and said, "Hey, kind of what's going on?" And so, as a coach, that's what our job is, is to, we're not here to just talk about, hey, these are your paces and these are your workouts and all that kind of stuff. Coaching is kind of like, you know, 50%, training plans, and then 50% life coach. We're here to kind of like help on the other aspects outside of training, because as we've talked about before, it all kind of flows together. The lifestyle affects the training, and the training affects the lifestyle. So, you know, by far the vast majority of your time is spent living life, not training. So it seems pretty clear and obvious that, your lifestyle should affect your training, and absolutely does. And so, I was talking to her and she's like, well, my daughter was accepted to university, and the weekend of my race is the weekend that we're supposed to go to her new university and like pick her dorm, pick her like living accommodations, and kind of do some of that stuff. And I have 2 kids. One is, in his 20s, and he's already graduated from college, and the other one is in high school. So I kind of approach this as, hey, I've got some experience here. Having a child going off to college is an extremely emotional event, not just for the kid itself and himself, because they're kind of venturing out on their own. They got this freedom that they had never had before, and they're kind of like on their own, figuring things out. But then, as parents, we're trying to release the reins a little bit, and they're no longer going to be around. The like what we used to do is like Friday night pizza and a movie, that kind of stuff. I kind of missed him, and I was like, no more Friday night pizza and a movie kind of stuff. So it's emotional on the parent side as well as the child side. The reason that I'm telling you this is because I actually told her that I didn't think that she should do the race. And so she's like, "I'm going back and forth on whether I do it or not." And I said, "To be honest with you, I don't think you should do it. I think you should defer, because this is an event that you don't want to miss. You don't want to miss that opportunity to spend this time with your child, and, doing something that is a huge milestone in their life. And there's always going to be races. There's only going to be one chance that you get to go and, be with your child as they pick out their living accommodations for their first year of college. So I thought that the choice was obvious, but, as an athlete, I can understand why she was struggling with it so much, because I've kind of struggled with the same thing. Trying to say, oh, this year's going to be a really busy year with a lot going on. Do I have the time and the bandwidth to train the way that I need or want to train for the performance that I want to get out of this event? And so the reason that I'm kind of going into this story is, when it comes time, that we sit down, whether it be at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, and we're planning out a race calendar, on what races we want to do, and, where we want to go. Do we want destination races? Do we want like one or two like big A races, and then just a couple small like tune-up races, or what? How do we want to approach this? I think it's so crucial to sit down and say, okay, outside of training, what are the demands on my time? And what are there any special events that are taking place this year? How active, if I have kids, how active are those kids? If I'm a single parent, the activity level of kids falls solely on you as the single parent. Or if you're married and you have the ability to share that responsibility, then that's something that you should talk it over with your significant other on whether they are willing and able to share some of the load so that you can train the way that you need or want to train. So trying to shoehorn a race that you don't have time to train for may be just the wrong way to start, and it kind of
Mhm.
sets you on the wrong tone, because the way that I look at it is like a race is just one day, and if it's a half Ironman, you're talking maybe you know anywhere between 3 to 6 hours of your time is going to be spent doing this race, but the time that you spend training for it is on order of magnitude so much greater than the actual time it takes to actually do the race. So you want to enjoy the process, not just the day of the event, because that's just like the test, but you want to enjoy the journey getting there. And if the journey is just like kicking and screaming and just it's so unenjoyable, and it's just like, oh, I have another workout to do. If you're going into it like that, then why are you doing it
Mhm.
anyway? I mean, this stuff should add to our life, not take away from
Yeah,
it. And
absolutely.
so there's another aspect that I wanted to mention. It's not only are we picking races that fit into our lifestyle, but we want to form expectations that are realistic and also fit into our lifestyle. So one of the things that some athletes come to me and they say, hey, I want to do a marathon, you know, and then for some reason people fantasize about doing marathons. I don't get it, but you know, it it's a huge commitment,
Mhm.
and there are other distance races that are you know not as so commitment driven, and can be enjoyable as well. Um, so when they come to me and say, "I want to train for marathon," so I was like, "Well, then what are the expectations that you have in terms of your performance? Do you have any performance driven expectations? Hey, I want to run this marathon. I want to have this particular like average pace. I want to negative split my marathon, or I just want to be able to just I want to run the whole thing and not walk any of it." Or are you just coming in and say, "Look, I just want to finish. I just want to check the box and just say, hey, I did it. I went 26.2 miles in one day." If that's, so when it comes to forming these expectations, I think it's important to consider your demands on your life, on whether you have the, the bandwidth to train the way that you need to train in order to meet those expectations. Because there's one of the worst feelings in the world is to get to race day saying, I couldn't train the way that I wanted to, and this is not going to go well. And you're not going to enjoy it. And a lot of people like they already built in these excuses on race day. They're just like, oh, my training didn't go very well, so this is like a train. This is just a training day for me. I was like, BS. This is a marathon. This is not a training day. There's no excuses. You did what you did. You had the time to do what you did, and you did it either to the best of your abilities, or you found ways that you compromised, and you had other things that you prioritized, which is completely reasonable and responsible. So now that I've kind of gone on to like this huge tirade on picking races that fit and realistic expectations, Katie, what are some of your thoughts when, let's say, you are sitting down to plan your race calendar?
Mhm.
You are a mom of a young child. You have your own business. You do work from home, so there is that level of freedom, and but you're also a wife, you know,
Mhm.
that needs and not just needs, but wants to spend time with your significant other and have a healthy relationship. So considering the demands that your son, your child presents, and your relationship with your significant other and job. How do you juggle it all? How do you rank these priorities and picking distances and races and times of the year that you can and can't race when forming your calendar?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think now is a little bit different. So when my son was younger, when he was little, I didn't race actually much. I mean, it was right, he was born and then 2020 happened. So COVID and all the races were canceled, and that I was doing a lot of running with him in the stroller. So that was one of the ways I kind of got around that because he was home with me a lot. My work at the time actually really slowed down. So it was almost like a little bit of a blessing to be able to spend time with him. But a lot of my time running was with the stroller, and then all the races were canceled, and that kind of like all my ambitions kind of fizzled out, just like with many people. And then when he started being in preschool, I actually started working more full time. So at that time, I was just kind of running, like, I had no ambition at that time to do the marathon because I knew I didn't have the time to train. So I think I was starting to ramp up my training a little bit, but it wasn't until probably like 2 years ago, and I was still working full time, I started doing like 5Ks and 10Ks again because I was like, okay, I can train for that. Like I have the time, I can do a couple, 2, 3 runs during the week, and then maybe a couple runs on the weekend when my husband's home, and maybe 20 to 40, max 40 miles a week. It wasn't much because that's all I had, and I was realistic about it. And then when my schedule changed recently, where I was working more part-time, and my son's in a preschool, but there's a nice program here that kind of 15 hours are covered. So like it made it a little more financially able for me to be part-time and have then my own flexibility to set my training. So I'm just at a very nice place that I know I won't be at forever, like where he's in preschool and he has activities, but nothing like, they get into when they start to go to school. We do like jujitsu and some other activities with him. So I have a lot more time right now to be able to put in that training. And I understand like I'm kind of in a really great spot. So I'm taking advantage of it. Like I'm trying to run a PR in the marathon at, the age of, it'll be 42 just to get my age. So it'll be like, okay, like I'm going to go for it. Right. But this is a perfect time because I have the time to do it. I have the flexibility in my schedule to do it. In 3 years, I might decide to go back to full time, and then I'm juggling him in school and activities and a full time job. Probably running a marathon at my best pace isn't going to be possible. So that's kind of, a little bit about my most recent journey with my son. And then, of course, I trained before with a job, but it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier when you don't have kids, I think, my perspective, when you have a little more like independent, you can just do whatever you want outside of work. So I do think that it is important to pick the things that you can that you can train for. And if have a lot of things you're juggling, like saying I'm going to do a PR in a marathon, it just may not work out, and then that's disappointing. And you don't want to be miserable either. Like I can't imagine waking up at, like, I just can't imagine waking up at 4 a.m. every day to train because my sleep is already kind of an issue for me. I think that would just like unravel me, right? So there's certain things I won't compromise on, and I think that's important to keep in mind. I also think as athletes, like I'm thinking of the triathletes that I've been around, like it's always like, as a triathlete, I always felt like that when I was doing triathlon, there was this like expectation, like, oh, you're only doing an Olympic distance, like same sort of in running in a way, but it's a little less this way. Oh, well, you're not really a triathlete. I just always felt like, and I don't think anyone said this to me explicitly, but they're like, oh, you're not a real triathlete till you've done like an Ironman. And so there's this like pressure almost. And I think people kind of get caught up like into that culture of like, oh, well, maybe they don't even want to maybe they don't even really want to do that, but it's like, oh well, I want to be more badass, so I'm going to like sign up for this race and do this Ironman, and there isn't really like a thought about what else is happening in their life. Is that really going to fit? Like you have 3 young kids and you're have a wife and you're working full time, like that's probably not a great choice. I think I mentioned to Justin, I just gotta mention this because it was like I was listening to this book on Audible. It was like Iron Dad or some and I like he was supposed to be funny, and the whole time I'm like listening to this book, I'm just what? I'm just surprised his wife didn't divorce him. It was a tragedy. It was like a tragedy to me. And he has these three young kids, and I mean, this is not funny at all to me. This is just, oh my gosh, like this is an example of what you don't do. You don't sign up for an Ironman maybe at that stage of life. Like I don't know. Maybe people can do what they need to do, but it's like you've got to really think about not only your schedule, but how is this going to impact like those around you and your family. And I don't really, I think divorce, you don't want to have that be on the table because you signed up for some race. So there's, I think, a lot to kind of think about with that whole lifestyle. Like you've got to fit the training into your lifestyle. We're not many of us who are probably here. I'm not a professional athlete. I don't make money. I mean, I maybe get some free stuff here and there, but I definitely don't make like enough money doing it. So it's like, what's it really worth it to compromise all these other things so that you can do this sport? Most of us aren't making money doing it. So you've got to enjoy the process. It shouldn't hopefully unravel your relationships. That kind of stuff is all things that I think people need to really consider. Is even me, like I think I've asked my husband a few times, like, is my running becoming an issue? Like, is it like, are you finding that I'm running too much? Is it causing issue? Because he probably wouldn't say it out loud. I must have to ask him. And luckily he's like, oh no, it's fine. But I'm like, well, if it ever becomes an issue, you need to tell me, before it becomes a big problem and things blow up and I didn't even know, or I maybe was aware, but I didn't know how bad it was. So even talking with your spouse when you're thinking that that's probably good, don't just sign up for the Ironman. Maybe talk to your spouse about it too. Don't just do it without consulting your family, because I think that's also important. So those are some of my thoughts. I don't know if you have anything to add or things that your own experience, Justin.
Yeah, there's no bonus points for like missing stuff. You're just like, oh, I missed my kid's taekwondo belt test because I was out for a long run. That's just ridiculous, in my opinion. That's pretty bad. Um, so uh, being an endurance athlete really requires a master's degree in management, and being able to juggle all these things. Um, I kind of see some lagging going on. So
Yeah, a little
sorry if
bit, but
our
I can
sound
still.
quality and video is
Yeah, I think the audio is okay. I think, but the video might be a little lagging, which is
okay. So
okay.
the audio is okay. That's all that
I think
matters.
so. I think so. So
I don't
far,
really care about the
from
video
my
part,
perspective, but
but
we'll see. Because
all
I'll
right.
go back and.
Um, I'm just kind of looking through my notes here on making sure that
Kind of wrap up.
I've said everything that I kind of wanted to say at the beginning of this. Um, oh, one point that I did want to bring up was we keep talking about finding races that fit into our life. I think that we need to further refine this statement. Not only are we trying to find a race that fits into our life, we want a race that easily fits into our life. So, what I do find working with endurance athletes, and most of them tend to be these A type personalities, is you know they want to find a race that they think they could possibly train for. They're like, I think I can do this. Um, I don't want that kind of scenario, because then that already tells me that we're already stretched. That there may be some room in this to where stuff is going to get delayed and pushed around and maybe not get done.
Mhm.
which is expected to, I think, to a certain extent, that not every workout can be done. So I want to find a race that I know that I can fit the training in and be able to still participate in the life events that I think are important, um,
Mhm.
that I want to do. Not everything is, a significant life event. So, you know, there are going to be sacrifices that you may have to make from time to time, whether that means, um, you know, I don't know. It's like if you go to the grocery store with your spouse, and that's kind of like what you guys do. You kind of go and you pick the foods out that you're going to be eating that week, and you do that together. Maybe talking to your spouse and say, "Hey, you know, I know that we typically do this together. Um, is it okay with you if maybe you take the lead on this, and kind of and you can do the grocery shopping, and then I can then take that time to like a workout that I would be doing, or even if it's not a workout, if you're just using that time for recovery, or something else training related, trying to find those little pieces of time, because there are going to have to be sacrifices, whether it comes in terms of sleep, or other events that may not be all that important. It's just part of like your routine that you would normally do. So uh,
Mhm.
don't just find a race that you think you can possibly train for. Find one that you know you can train for, and I almost can guarantee you will have a more enjoyable time training for that race, and you will be more than likely going to the starting line healthier than you would if you had picked a race where you thought you had the time to train for it and could do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely
So,
agree. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I think it's like, yeah, and that allow like when you pick something you know you can train for it, it's it's like you're allowing for like those little things that come up too. Like, I don't know, like you're not trying to, you've got only this pocket of time and you only have so much, you're like, oh, I can probably train for this. But then things kind of come up in life that happen and you're like, like, oh, well, now I don't have the time because these things come up. When you have something you absolutely, have the time to train for, then it's just easier because you can maybe have a little bit more flexibility for things like if your kids get sick, you have to be home with them or what, like those little things that come up in life. It doesn't totally derail your training quite so much too, because you have to, because you maybe have some flexibility built in there, like, oh well, I only have this workout, I can kind of fit it in up here or whatever, instead of having every single moment of your day so maxed out you can't be flexible, because everything's scheduled so much because you're trying to fit your training in that you don't have that flexibility in there too. So yeah, I think maybe moving on, we can talk a little bit more about these different sort of lifestyle scenarios, because I think there'll be more things that we can kind of bring up within that, with our own experiences working with people or personal experiences. So I just want to talk about each group, like each scenario that we've kind of come up with in terms of what people might be experiencing in terms of their lifestyle. Obviously, there's probably going to be other things that we didn't bring up here, but these are the major ones. And obviously, there's going to be probably some overlap with some of them. But the first thing is like that working parent scenario, the, full-time working parent, or even like the stay-at-home parent who has two or more kids, so, because it could be one kid, but like a more challenging is probably when there are two or more kids. And then the work versus like young kids versus teenagers, older kids, there's differences there. So let's talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about like a little bit maybe about the working, single person, but I don't know if we'll spend as much time on that because it's more likely the working single person who's going to be doing like the shift work or the 12-hour nursing schedule where they're doing 12-hour shifts back to back. We'll talk about that. Service employees like bartenders, wait staff that have kind of a weird variable schedule, or night shift workers that work overnight, or like doctors on call, those types of scenarios we'll try to talk a little bit about. And obviously there may be some overlap with some of those situations, but that is kind of how we're going to structure this next portion. So let's start with because both Justin and I are in this scenario, but we have different age kids. Is that working parent or even the stay-at-home parent? Because that's itself, especially with younger kids, is going to be a challenge. So let's kind of dive into that. I think for this one, just some of the challenges is just basically, or especially with younger kids, let's start there. If you have toddlers or infants, like you don't have the opportunity to just be like, stay at home, I'm going to go for a run. Like they have to either be with you or somebody has to be watching them all of the time. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. You have to figure out, are you going to take them in a stroller? Are you going to try to run on the treadmill while they're taking a nap? So it's like that makes it more challenging in that sense. And if you're working full time, then you have to figure out when you're going to fit that training in with the caretaking and the working. Or if your stay-at-home mom is or dad is like, is that, you have to be with them all the time. How are you going to fit that in, with the kids in tow? Or, maybe there's a daycare scenario where or somebody can watch the kids for a little bit while you go do your workout. But those are just kind of the first sort of scenario. So I don't know. Justin, do you have anybody, you're working with that has this challenge, or any thoughts on this particular group or this particular lifestyle situation in terms of how to fit it in, or just any personal experience?
I think just personal experience for me is, I mean, when I started triathlon, I did have, my kids were a lot younger. I mean, I've been doing this for like 12 years. So, my youngest kid was like in elementary school. So, there were, you know, juggling acts going on, when it came time to, finding the time to go do a long workout where I needed to make sure that I had uh, childcare covered, for my kid or for my kids at that time. I know that there was an instance where I was training. I think it was for a half Ironman, and both of my kids were still fairly young, and I didn't feel like I could just kind of like leave them on their own. So, there was like a big brick session that I wanted to do, and I had to arrange, childcare, seeing if I had some friends that could help me out. And, they babysat, and I brought over, a bunch of pizzas for everybody, that kind of barter system. So, I mean, I do know that there were a lot. I can't count the number of 4 a.m. trainer sessions was in the living room on the bike trainer trying to get my workout in before everybody woke up, and kind of life started everybody else. So, there were a lot of, sacrificed sleep hours there in order to make sure that I got, the training that I wanted to do. It was a personal choice. I didn't feel obligated that I needed to do it, but it was something that I wanted to do. And because I wanted to do it, I was willing to make certain sacrifices, and those were it. So I think in general, for endurance athletes, most of them, I would say maybe a large proportion of them do train in the morning. And so, I think trying to get workouts done really before kind of everybody is awake and up and at them, and everybody's pawing at you, it's just like, hey, what's for breakfast? Where's my socks kind of stuff. So it's, you know, trying to get it done first thing sets you up for success, because if you're trying to wait for the end of the day to do it, you're more than likely to really have to dig deep for the motivation to do it, because you've spent the whole day living life, and now it comes time, it's just like, okay, now I got to find the energy and the motivation to go do this run or jump on this bike or, hit the pool for some swim laps and things like that. So I find for me, because I'm an early riser, that if I'm more than likely to do them in the morning and try and push the majority of that training as early into the day as I possibly can. But I do have, two a days where I have, an evening session. So that's another thing. It's like, if you are time strapped, then it could be, let's say that you're a long distance runner and you're training for a half marathon up to a mid course to long course, half marathon to marathon, and you've got, a 2 hour run that you need to do on a particular day. But, you have, it's on a Saturday and, one kid has, a basketball tournament to go to and the other kid has, a taekwondo belt test that they need to go to. And so, you're being pulled and all your time is being pulled and stretched in all kinds of different ways. One of the things that I love to do for my athletes in those types of situations is do split runs. I'll have them do, what I'll call a quality session in the morning that's going to have some intensity to it, and I may set that as an hour, or an hour and 15, depending on, how much time they have in the morning. If they can do the hour and 15, then that's great. That's what we want. Throw some race pace intervals in there. Throw some structured, have it like a structured fartlek or something. Get a quality session, and then at the end of the day, you know, the bulk of the day's load has been already done, and that's why I would like the first session to be a little bit heavier than the first session. And then you'll spend the balance, which is going to be, 45 minutes. You can either make that a zone 2 run, or you can kind of throw in a zone 2 with some tempo intervals, and still have a little bit of a quality session. But splitting it up that way is not going to hinder your progression. A lot of people are going to say, but you want to know what it's like to run for 2 hours. Okay, well, you know, I'm looking at cumulative fatigue. I'm looking for, because training is cumulative. You know, you only have to run the marathon once. So what good is it to know what it's like to run for 4 hours if you're not going to do that in training? So you're already going into the race not knowing what it's like to run that kind of volume. So my thing is, well, I would rather have 2 quality sessions than 1 subpar session, and forcing the runner to run 2 hours when they don't have the time to do it. Chances are, if they do it at the end of the day, they're already fatigued from the day's, events. So they're going into it, possibly going to lose form by the end of it and throwing in some junk miles that really don't count because they're doing it with bad form. It increases their risk of injury. So I would much rather have those 2 split sessions. You still get the cumulative effect of 2 hours worth of stress on the body. It's just not all in one session. But now I've guaranteed that those 2 sessions have good form, they're quality, and it sets my athlete up for success for tomorrow's training, because, we want to be able to do what we do today in a way that allows us to do something else tomorrow. That's consistency. And
Mhm.
that's where the progress comes from. Is the consistency, not knowing what it's like to run for 2 hours.
Right.
Big
Yeah, I
difference.
agree. Yeah,
So
I think it is I mean, there is sometimes benefit to like doing some time on feet, but I agree. It's like if that's it's I think it's much better to break it up if they're just gonna try to get up at some ungodly hour, like just to fit it in, or like like they're just doing it to get it done because they've got to do it and they're not really making it quality because they're stressed out about the rest of the day. Oh my gosh, I've got to do this 2 hour run. It's like stressful. And then they're maybe just kind of just slogging through it just to get through it so that they can go get to their kids or do whatever. So I do, I think that too, breaking it into a few sessions, or like if you, with something I do often is like I'll run in the morning and then I have because that's what I'm training for, is running. And so whenever I have a strength session, I very or never usually do the strength first. I always do the run. And then later in the day, I'll try to do my strength session. And if you have kids, what's kind of cool about that, if you happen to have a home gym, I mean, if you're lucky enough to have your equipment at home, have your kids come and hang out with you. Like, maybe get them involved. Yeah, your session isn't going to be as efficient, but that's something I've learned with my son, is like, he'll come up in our little workout area with me and he'll do a workout with me, and I'll do my sets and he'll kind of do his own thing. And yeah, it's like sometimes we'll listen to music, sometimes it's a little distracting, but it's amazing because he's now interested in working out, so like, don't be afraid to get your kids involved. And I think if you have a child that's like 5 or 6 or 7 or older, like, you can, maybe it's okay to, maybe for like a short period of time, like, if you have a treadmill, like, or somewhere you can do a bike or something indoors, like, yeah, you can do that and they can entertain themselves for a little bit. I do that on my easy days occasionally, and I have to go check on my son every 10 minutes, just if he's downstairs or whatever, just to make sure he's still doing okay and safe. But like, he's usually able to self entertain, or he comes up and hangs out with me. Would I do that for 3 hours? Absolutely not. That's probably not fair to him to just be like, okay, you're on your own, watch a movie. But I'll do that for short periods of time. So, like, you can get a little bit creative. And if my son's no longer able to fit in the stroller, he will go on his bike. He is able to ride his bike. Like, is that the most efficient run? Like, maybe not. So I kind of schedule that on my easy days. And it's kind of crazy because sometimes we're going 6-minute miles, sometimes we're going 10-minute miles on this bike. But it's like, it's fun, right? So I'm kind of like incorporating him a little bit into my training. Now, when I have like a really hard track workout or something that's a little harder, I have to kind of maybe arrange that he's not going to be with me, or there's going to be childcare for him, or he's at daycare. But like, you can find ways to incorporate your younger kids, and even sometimes older kids will ride with you or do some of your workout with you. So like, thinking of ways that you can get them involved too is maybe one way to do it. And then they'll probably appreciate, later on you're setting an example for them, and maybe they'll be active when they're older too. So that's just some thoughts I have. I think the other thing I want to mention is, like, I have on here workout when the kids are asleep. Like, I'm kind of there with Justin. Like, I think if that's absolutely what you have to do, is like, I've had some clients who like put their kids to bed and then they do like their workout. I just think, like, I don't know how, maybe there are night owls, there are people that like to work out at night. I guess there are those types of people out there who just love that and that's what they do. But in terms of scheduling nutrition and sleep and motivation, I just think that's a really hard time to do it. But if that's the only time you have and you have the ability to do it, at least I guess that works for some people. And then maybe if you're able to do it like at lunch, or schedule it over like a lunch hour, if you have a very flexible schedule. Like, the problem is, if you're working 8 hours, you only, you schedule the training, that might push your evening late, or you might have to work early, or, set your hours a little differently. But I think you can probably have some flexibility there. So those are my thoughts. What about like older, any thoughts, Justin, on like kids with, I mean, I think the biggest thing with teenagers is more their busy schedules. Like, teenagers, I think most teenagers have activities, right? So you're a lot of times, I think, chauffeuring the child around. And then, if they're really into an activity, I think of some of my friends who have older kids that are like into hockey and they're traveling, over the weekend. I mean, it gets complicated, right, when you have older kids. So any thoughts there with that scenario?
Yeah. I mean, when my oldest son was really active, he ran cross country, he ran indoor and outdoor track for high school. So, there were times where there were long, trips to, go to a cross country event that wasn't in town. Um, and those were the days that, I made the effort to get up earlier than normal, do my sessions. So that way I knew they were done. But that's what worked for me. You know, I implemented that strategy because I know that if I waited until afterwards, I may be less inclined to do it, and I wouldn't feel as fresh. I notice for me that if I have a morning session, I feel fresher. I feel better during that workout, and I feel my performance is better. Then I compare that same workout done in the evening time, and I don't feel as fresh. My mind is, maybe distracted because I'm thinking about what happened during the day. And by that time, my body is telling me, we've had a long day. It's time to start winding down. And I'm trying to fight that urge and convince it to no, it's not time to start to wind things down. We're actually trying to ramp things up, and we want, performance for this workout. So, you're fighting your body's natural signals that, the sun is setting, it's time to start winding down, and it's trying to slow the day down and not try and speed it back up again. So that's why I tend to train early in the morning. Right now, my oldest son is living on his own in another city, but my youngest son, I share custody with my son, so I have him every other week. So I get 50% of the time, and so the weeks that I have him, I don't live in his school district, so I take him back and forth to school. I knew that going in when I bought my house, outside of his school area, and it is really really demanding and super stressful, because I love high volume training. I mean, for instance, today my sessions was, I had a 3K swim with some long endurance efforts because I'm trying to rebuild my swim from a frozen shoulder and a torn rotator cuff and relocated bicep tendon and all kinds of other jazz that's going on. And then following an elbow surgery. So I'm having to rebuild my swim. And so, these I'm trying to build up that endurance before I start to overlay speed on it. Because right now, in order to get the races done that I want to do, I need to be able to just swim the distance. I know that I can bike and I know that I can run. I just need to be able to get in and out of the water with the least amount of damage done to, my glycogen stores and my mental fortitude. And right after that swim, I knew that I had a strength conditioning run, which was 50 minutes of varying elevation. It's like a progressive elevation. So it's step, 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 and then drops, and then step, 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 drop, all at like a race pace. And so it's a pretty intense session, and you're doing it right after a fairly challenging swim. And so it's really stressful, and I had to make sure that I got my son to school before all this because I don't have enough time to get to the gym, do half of that session, do one of those, and then come home, pick him up, make sure he's gotten out of bed and is prepared to leave, which is another test in itself, test of my faithfulness. And then be able to go back to the gym and do the second half of the session. I was doing that for a little bit, but I found it was actually causing me more stress, and I was like, wheeling into the driveway on two wheels, trying to make sure that I got there on time, and pry him out of the house and go off to school and then go finish off my session. So it's things like that. Trying to find those small pockets of time that you can do something. But then when you realize that it's causing more stress to do these, small little pockets of time, then make the adjustment. So, it's the flexibility. I have no problems being able to go for like my long run and my long ride because I mean, my kid is 16 years old and clearly he can, he entertains himself quite well. So, out of the week that he's here, I don't get to spend a whole week with him because he's, basically shut up in his room like most teenagers do with PlayStations and everything else. So, he entertains himself. He doesn't need my constant attention, and so I don't have the parenting guilt of
Mhm.
going out and doing my session and leaving him here. but I imagine that parenting guilt can be significant for others.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
do
I have
know
it.
that it tends
Yeah.
to be a little bit stronger for female athletes.
Right.
The parenting guilt. "Oh, I'm failing as a mother because I'm doing this for me," which
Hmm.
is also important. Um, so I don't have that scenario these days.
Yeah, I definitely have it that a little bit with my son. I mean, there's definitely times I'm like that little bit of guilt, comes in like, oh, should I be doing this? Or I definitely make I for me it's like there's social runs and things. Like I don't tend to for me it's like I gotta that's the reason I like running. I can go and do it and come back and I can do it from my house and I can get it done and get my training in and I don't have to go somewhere to do it. It fits into my lifestyle because I can do it from here and I have like I'm lucky to have my own home gym so I don't have to go anywhere at this point and that makes saves a lot of time for me.
Mm.
And so I'm involved in like a running, group or like a running, it's like a club or like a team. And I feel bad, but it's like I can't carve out like 30 minutes to drive into town to like go run. I mean, because then
Yeah.
that's when I feel guilty. It's like, oh, I'm doing this, even though it's like a social thing kind of, and you're running with other people, which I know is probably good. It's hard for me to feel like that's an extra like almost hour that I could have done training or been with my son to go drive in. And so, even though my husband's like, it's probably good for you to go do social things, it's like, I know, but if I can just go on my run from here and save that extra hour to do something else, so I think that's where sometimes the guilt comes in for me is like, do, and why I probably do most of my runs solo and from home is because to drive somewhere and to do something social is like seems like okay, this is just not something that's I can do right now. Really, maybe someday I will do more of that. But I think that's a scenario a lot of working like moms or dads maybe find themselves in is like we want to go run with others, but if it's way out of our way, like that's a lot of extra time, and I don't have time to do coffee after because I've got to go back and be my family, So that's probably where more of my guilt comes from. And then also, I think you kind of mentioned like breaking things up. Like I do that a lot. Like tomorrow, I think I had like an 8 mile run on my schedule. And I'm like, I'm feeling a little bit fatigued. I'm gonna break. I don't have time. I don't have like a full like time commitment to do that. I have these little chunks throughout the day. So I'm just gonna break it up into 2 runs and then I'm gonna do my strength. And it's like broken up throughout the day into these 3 chunks of like smaller sessions. And it's just like, well, that I got like all appointments the rest of the time. I'm just kind of like chunking it out. It seems like I'm always in workout clothes working from home because I'm always like need to be ready to go do a workout when the time allows, it seems like. And I'm really lucky to be able to do that because I can just
Yeah.
break it all up. But sometimes I have to do that. Like, actually I had the strength session today and I was supposed to go to the dentist and I had to start it and then I'm gonna have to finish it later. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that's okay. Like, yes, is it maybe better to do it all at once? Probably, but I'm still getting it done. It's like, it's fine. It's going to be okay. So it's like just being able to have that flexibility a little bit and knowing that in certain circumstances, like you probably can't break up. I mean, you probably could break up a hard session into 2, maybe, but you might not get the most out of it. But on a recovery day or a day you're just trying to kind of get in, the mileage or whatever, like it's probably even better in some instances to break it into 2. So you're taking a little bit of that fatigue out of the equation of having like a full 8 or 10 mile run. You're just breaking into 2 recovery sessions. And so I think that's important to bring up. Let's move to the shift. So, like the nurses out there, like the 12-hour shift situation where somebody's got, I worked years and years ago as a CNA and I worked these 12-hour shifts and I would work usually like 3, sometimes 4 days in a row of these 12-hour shifts. Usually they were chunked all together and then I would have like 3 or 4 days off. And I was running at the time, but that's a challenging scenario to have most of the time when someone's doing those shifts, like I'm thinking nurses, I'm thinking when I was working as a CNA, I was on my feet all day. I'm running around. Like it's not like, oh, I'm going to finish my 12-hour shift and I'm going to be able to like go do a run. Like I might be able to, but it's not going to be a great one. So I think in that scenario, like, and I can, you can sort of chime in. For me, what I tend to recommend is like the very first day you have that 12-hour shift, like try to get a good workout in that morning if you can. I know it's hard if it's like 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. or 7 to 7. Like, I know that's a hard situation. You might not be able to get a lot, like a big volume of training, but try to get like a good workout in that first day. And then maybe, if you can afford to take like 2 days off, like maybe that's those 2 days after that are just off. And then you might have to do a lot more volume on your off days. You might, if you have the time, then those 4 days without any work, can you fit in more volume on those days? And then you're just, so I'm thinking like you might have to schedule your training a little bit like that. I know I got creative when I was doing that CNA. I remember I would leave my car at the hospital and I would put all my stuff I needed either in my car or in my locker. And then I would run home the first night. And then in the morning, I would get up and I would run back to the hospital. It was like a 30 or 45-minute run. And then I would shower right before and get ready. And I'd have all my stuff in my like locker in my car. So my car would be there overnight, which I was fine with. So I would do that. I would get creative because then it would force me to wake up in the morning and run to the hospital. Not everybody can do that because maybe they don't live close enough, or this where they live doesn't work out. But I mean, you can get creative. So just something to think about. What are your thoughts on that sort of situation?
Yeah, I find it to be interesting because I've I had little little experience working with people that had that type of demand. So I had a hard time relating. So I just finished off a training plan with an athlete. She came to me and said, "I kind of want to try following a structured plan." And so I was like, "Great, I'm more than happy." I create, I part of my business is I build, custom plans athletes, and I always have a consultation with the athlete, and we talk about things. What were the demands on your life? What are some of your previous injury history, and things like that. So it's you know what is your availability to train? Because ultimately I want to create a plan that sets them up for success, which means I need to build a plan that fits into their life. And if I build a plan that doesn't fit, then chances are they're not going to do some of the sessions that I feel like I really want them to do. And then, it just all kind of like falls apart, and, they may not have the best day that they could have when it comes for race day. This athlete was a nurse, and she was a traveling nurse at that. So, the hospital that she worked at wasn't in her area. And so, it was almost kind of like an hour, couple hour drive to the hospital. And she was, basically 3 days on and 3 days off. But that schedule kind of like shifted all the time. So it may not have always been 3 days. Sometimes it was 4 days. But she was a traveling nurse, so she got plugged in whenever she was needed. So uh, that was particularly challenging, and I'm actually really glad that she came to me for a plan, because I think it gave me a lot of valuable experience working with somebody who doesn't have the typical schedule where they work their 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever, and then they have weekends off and they can train. Those plans are really kind of easy to build to a certain extent, but these nuances of people that work some of these odd shifts, or inconsistent shifts that don't follow a regular pattern, so it's hard to kind of build consistency. And so those were some of the things that I did with her that you did in your plan. So I always kind of gave her a run. Um, I want to say that she didn't like having a run like on her first day, because that was kind of her travel day. And so not only did she have to work the 12 hours, but she also had to drive like the 2 hours to kind of get there. And so it was a super long day for her. So we typically use those as kind of like rest day. Then I gave her her easy stuff, and there were a couple. maybe a little interval runs, but she knew that she could do them on the hotel treadmill, and that she didn't have to like find routes and stuff to run on. So I was like, whatever lessens the stress, we can do some treadmill stuff while you're working. That gives us a chance to do some pace work, some strength conditioning runs. If you're feeling like you can get that done uh, using good form, and so I would always try and would start and not after the shift was done, because I knew that it kind of opened her up for running with poor form if she waited to the end of the day. Um, but yeah, my wife used to work shift work, and it was kind of like 3 days on and 3 days off, but it was rotating. And so like those 3 days would be like during the day shift, and then the next time she went to work was a mid shift. So it's kind of like in the middle of the day through to like 10 o'clock at night. And then the next time after that she went to work, it was all
Oh my god.
midnight shift.
That's like
Those
the
those
worst
shifts
for your
are
sleep. Oh my god.
insane.
That's not
It,
even
it
fair. That's awful. Yeah.
for a shift like that, I would have to seriously question. Um, we need to be really careful on the type of race that we pick, because the structure of your work schedule is so volatile that your body doesn't know when it's supposed to be sleeping. And if
Right.
the most of our recovery takes place when we're sleeping, you're already chances are you're already sleep deprived going
Mhm.
into it. And I'm trying to overlay intensity on top of it, and I'm setting you up for injury risks significantly higher than the normal athlete, and the inability to absorb the fitness that you're trying to accumulate.
Yeah.
So, I may say,
Yeah.
if that's kind of the schedule that you're working, maybe focusing on, shorter distance races, and then go for like performance driven goals. Say, hey,
Right. Yeah.
I can only a 5K that I can run because that's the training that I can do because of my work schedule is so
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Then
Because
that means, okay,
that's a
now we can throw in some high intensity stuff.
right. That's a lot of variability. Like the to have someone, because I
Yeah.
mean the sleep. I think someone that's just doing the night shifts, like they're used to that, they're doing it. I mean, I can't say that that's great either, because that is so disruptive on our circadian rhythm. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but it's like I think when they're used to that, like you're doing the night shift consistently, like you're kind of used to that. Maybe you can schedule it. I kind of put in like our notes, like the problem with that is when you're done with, so let's say you work 7 to 7 p.m., 7 a.m., kind of that 12-hour, like a nurse who maybe works the night shift overnight, like you're going to be done and you're going to be like wiped out. I think personally, what's probably the best scenario in that situation is to like come home, wind down, go to sleep, try to get as much sleep as you can, which is hard to do. And then maybe do a workout. But again, like, that it's going to be like a light workout or like a really light, like maybe low volume intervals, but you're not going to be able to maybe train a lot of volume or do a lot in that scenario. So it's like probably a little more challenging in that situation, because then when you kind of go back, so a lot of these people who work these night shifts then kind of try to go back to somewhat of a normal schedule the rest of the time to sort of match their family schedule. And it's just so hard because then you're sort of totally tired. I think in that scenario, it's probably really, really hard to do something like like an Ironman or something really ambitious. I think maybe it can be done, but I just think like the sleep issues that are going to come from that, and like, I mean, there's so much research on how that sort of shift work isn't so great, for our health overall. So I can't. I would tend to sort of encourage someone, maybe in that situation when you're doing some training for like a lower, like a 10K, 5K sprint, Olympic distance triathlon, but maybe we're really focusing on things that are going to better your health and maybe keep you just overall metabolically healthy. And we're not going to do something like very, very stressful on top of that sort of stressful work situation. So I think that's an example with that. And or like a doctor who's like on call all the time, be woken up in the middle of the night to go deliver a baby, or like those types of situations, like it's probably not realistic, because the stress of your job and then and the way you have to be disrupted with your sleep so much is just so stressful on the body. I just don't think in that situation it's very good idea to then be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to load a bunch of additional stress onto myself and train for this Ironman or like marathon or like ultra distance event. Like I've definitely worked with doctors I have a few in mind that are kind of in that scenario, like I'm going to do this ultra race and like I'm trying to help him with his nutrition, and he's got this crazy schedule. He's working, sorry, my son's home. He's working like doing this other, like working at this hospital and this hospital and whatever. And he was constantly struggling with like injury and not being able to kind of make it to the race day despite my best efforts to help him with the nutrition. It was just all of that stress and the work schedule that just was like, he was having a hard time fitting in his training and doing like a whole load of volume all at once. And then he would have days on end where he couldn't train. And it's like, I just don't think that's going to be conducive to making it to your race healthy and ready to go. So I think, again, this is kind of where we have to be a little bit more like, as a coach, you're saying you have to kind of have that conversation with people. And sometimes the conversation needs to be like, maybe like, you want to think about your health first. You want to think about your well-being first. And is this really serving you? In the first goal, it should be like health. Like I'm fully aware that a marathon isn't going to be is training in the marathon for a PR is not the healthiest thing you can do. Like there's some things there that are stressful in the body, but I'm not going to continuously do that all year round. Like I do the marathon. I've been kind of in this marathon phase, but then I'm taking a step back for a while, and I'm going to focus on some shorter races, because I just don't think it's good to sort of always be in that like high training volume, like high intensity mode where you have to be doing some of these races either. So I think it's just kind of also, I mean, we could almost have a whole topic on just seasons, like building a whole year and like what to think about, in that whole year and how to sort of build it out. But, I think with some of these schedules, it's just, especially if you're like a night shift worker or a nurse and you have kids, or you're a doctor and you have kids, like then you're just adding, I think at that point it's just training for like life, training for health. Like maybe you're signing up for a race, but your expectations do have to be able to match what your current lifestyle is. And I think that's the whole thing we're trying to say. I don't know if you have any other like
Yeah, I'll be super
yeah.
I'll be super
Yeah,
quick
I know
with
we're a
it.
little over. So.
There's yeah, there's one point that I wanted to make is that we have the thought that we have to follow a 7-day training plan. It says that our training week has to be 7 days. So if you have like this crazy kind of work schedule, um, then spreading out 7 days worth of training volume across 10 days may be the better option. I know that, when I work with older athletes, that is kind of the approach that we use, because it allows me to spread out that volume over more days and build in some recovery stuff. Because the older we get, the more challenging it is for us to recover from training. So, if you have such a volatile work schedule, you don't have to have a long run every single week. You know, Rather than look at that, say, okay, over the next 10 days, that's my training week. And then spread that volume out and allow it
Mhm.
to, fit into the work schedule a little bit, and like plugging holes and finding opportunities, finding the best opportunity for that long run to take place, and not, the day that, you come off of night shift, or something like that, where, that's probably less than ideal. So,
Mhm. And I think also
that's another kind of like big point that I wanted to bring up.
yeah, I think another point with that is like making sure you sign up for a race and give yourself as much time, plenty of time too, to like, depending on where you're coming from, obviously, and what you've been training for and where you're at, like giving yourself plenty of time. Like if you're like, I want to do a marathon I think thinking about the timing of when you pick that race and how much time you have, and I think if you have a little bit of issues scheduling, or there's going to be things that maybe come up like illnesses, or your work schedule may get weird, like you think about it and you kind of like, okay, I'm going to schedule this farther out so I have a little more time, so you can do like a 10-day kind of training week kind of, or it's not a week, but like you kind of do a 10-day cycle, where you're go and you allow yourself a little more recovery, but maybe you're building out a little bit of a longer build so that you can do it and you're not trying to fill in a lot of training to a small chunk. And then the last thing I just want to mention is we didn't really talk about just the travel situation. So somebody who's traveling, really quickly, I
Yeah,
think just
I
talking about
I
that, and then
definitely want. I definitely wanted
yeah,
to
I
make
think we
talk
talk
about that.
about that because I think I don't want to leave that out. I think that was another important one, and then we can kind of wrap up. But I think the big thing, and you mentioned this too, kind of in your notes, is just doing a little bit of. I mean, some people like, so I work with people who travel, and I actually have a client now that I'm kind of working with doing a little bit of a run training plan for, and she travels here and there. So she just tells me when she's going to be gone and her availability. And sometimes she'll look ahead at the hotel and kind of look at what they have for equipment. And sometimes she'll share that with me. And then we're just trying to decide what we're going to do, what her timing looks like, if she's going to run. So I think anytime you're going to travel, I think the big thing is just like, what's your schedule going to look like while you're there? And can you look at, local running, could you find a local running path, or like a gym, or what's the gym at the facility at the hotel going to look like? And trying to do a little bit of prep and research so that what you have available to you, and if there's any gyms nearby for like a pool or something if you want to get a swim in. And I think you mentioned something too just about structuring the training, but I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just kind of looking at um, what, planning it out a little, what's available to you. Is there somewhere safe you can go running? Because I've definitely been traveling and gone for a run and been like, oh my goodness, I did not end up in like, it was like like not so good part of the city, and I didn't think, I didn't like no, and I had it like turned around, I was fine. But I, you might want to do a little bit of research if you're going to be somewhere that you're not familiar with. I mean, I'm the type of person that just loves to explore, but there's certain cities that maybe that's dangerous, right? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, there are two things that this, and one is, I mean, yes, pre-planning ahead of time, kind of like trying to find a facility that you know that you could train in. Having a membership already, if you know that you travel a lot, maybe it's worth it for you to have a membership to places like the YMCA or Gold's Gym, where you know that there are locations spread all, throughout, and to see, because that opens up your possibilities. Like, okay, if I am traveling, hopefully there's a location in the area that I'm going to be. But it sets you up for a little bit of more success and gives you more options to accommodate. The next one that I would do is you can structure your training plan in such a way that if you know that you're going to be traveling for an extended time period, so it's like, let's say that you have, a business trip and you're going to be somewhere for 5 days. What we can do is, those maybe 2 to 3 weeks leading up to that business trip. And if I'm working with, let's say, a triathlete, and they're not going to be able to bring their bike, but they're able to at the location, then I'll do a heavy bike block. I'll cut their running back, to kind of a minimum training volume on the run, and I'll load them up on the bike. And we're talking like, maybe a couple double bike days, some good quality intensity sessions for those 3 weeks leading up to the trip, which will allow them to take that time off and not lose much bike fitness, because when they're on the trip, then they'll be able to, capitalize on that time and be able to run or swim or do strength sessions or whatever it is that they have the availability to do. But they'll be able to at least run. I mean, chances are you can run anywhere, hopefully.
Hopefully.
If you're at the hotel, chances are 9 times out of 10 the hotel has a crappy treadmill that you can at least use so that you're not
Mhm.
running out in the hood, worrying
Yeah,
about gunshots.
or just
But
do a little research. Yeah, ask the front desk. Like,
so
for a safe place.
those those are the